Well, I'm sure you've heard about what's going on the Abraham Lincoln, the USS Abraham Lincoln. Troops have been stuck there for 8 months, going on 9 months soon, without a break or a port call. They're running out of supplies. The food is getting old and stale. Check this out. Can you imagine? You go sit down after a long, hard day, and that's your meal. Anyway, the food's bad. They're running out of hot water. They're experiencing moldy conditions and going without laundry for weeks at a time. Several sailors have tried to take their own lives, and there has been no rotation of the crew. And that's just on the ship. There are also reports that conditions are the same at the land based facilities around the region. So I just want to say this should surprise no one. If you're surprised by this, it means you have not understood the kind of people you voted into office. For a long time, it's been obvious that well, you know why I can say that? Because if you're surprised by this, then I know you voted for him. Because if you didn't vote for him, you won't be surprised by this because you would have known already. You would know it would turn out this way ultimately in the end. But for a long time, it's been obvious that three main characteristics represent this regime: corruption, cruelty, and incompetence. And what's going on in the Persian Gulf today falls under corruption and incompetence. I'm Jonathan Burton. I'm a former lifelong Republican. And one thing I'm actually thankful to Trump for is for exposing the lies that the Republican Party was built on and making it so obvious that not even I could ignore it any longer. And I could no longer not see it. But yesterday, the president really stepped in it when he minimized and denied the suffering the men and women in the Persian Gulf are going through. Then he insinuated that the families and relatives of these service members are lying about it. Check this out.
Okay, what else do I have to say?
Family members of U.S. service members are concerned about the conditions on board the USS Lincoln.
Well, no, that ship is moving. No, they're not. That ship is moving right now, or very shortly, and it's being replaced with another very similar ship.
Deployment's gone on too long.
No. Not nearly long enough. Thank you, everybody.
So her first statement was to tell the president that family members are concerned about the conditions aboard the Abraham Lincoln. And his response was no, they're not. He was literally saying the family members aren't concerned, insinuating that they were lying. I mean, can you imagine how infuriated the families must be when they hear this? And then in the second part, she mentioned how long they've been on the ship, and he replied, no, not nearly long enough. They haven't been on there long enough. I don't know what he's thinking, but that only served to further infuriate the families, and understandably so. If there could be a silver lining in all this, though, that would be it, because he basically just came out and said that he doesn't care about the conditions of the sailors and all the service members on board. But why would I say that's a silver lining? I'll tell you in a minute. But, they're sitting there being served food, like I showed you, and then they're watching him on TV saying, no, the families aren't wrong. No, the families are wrong. Nothing's wrong here. Nothing's happening here. It's not as bad as the families are telling us it is. That's not going to endear him to the troops. And that's the good news, because all aspiring dictators know you have to have the troops in your back pocket. You need them to swear allegiance to you over and above the Constitution and above the laws of the country. Because at some point, you're going to need them to break some laws for you to help you maintain power. So hopefully, this will help the MAGA service members, and there are a lot of MAGA people in the armed forces. This will help at least some of them see that life under Trump, even for them, will get worse. Nothing is immune from his destruction, not even the military. With that said, there's one other point I want to make, and that is that this was entirely predictable because this administration is filled with the most incompetent people we've ever seen, starting from the president on down. They've been very lucky up until now not to have had some major incident that would draw the public's attention. But, like time, their luck is running out. And this looks like this is one of the most visible signs so far that it's running out. This ship isn't running out of supplies and creating all these terrible conditions because of some unforeseen circumstances. It's running out of supplies because the way the military has been mismanaged by and incompetently managed by this administration. At a time when American troops are fighting a major war and the military is struggling with overstretched carriers, depleted munitions, and exhausted personnel, Pentagon leadership has devoted unbelievable amounts of time, money, manpower, and executive attention to changing names, rewriting websites, censoring books, investigating women and minorities, purging experienced officers, enforcing ideological conformity, holding prayer meetings and Bible studies with Doug Wilson, indoctrinating them into Christian nationalism, fighting journalists, and cleaning up scandals created by Hegseth himself. They fired a ton of our most experienced and competent people because they didn't pass the administration's purity test that would show they possess the appropriate amount of loyalty to the president. They fired many of our best people because they had a bad feeling about them. They had a bad feeling that some of these people might not be 1,000% loyal to Trump. And they feared that if Trump ever asked them to commit an unlawful or unconstitutional act, that they would refuse to do it. So they eliminated them. Then here's the insecure Secretary of War, who has wasted enormous amounts of time in the last year threatening senior officers with polygraph exams, including the active Joint Chiefs Chairman and the Joint Staff Director. He conducted polygraph exams of Pentagon personnel as rival factions attempted to uncover leakers and undermine one another. He proposed random polygraphs and expansive non disclosure agreements for thousands of military civilian employees. That's what he's wasting his time on. And we wonder why these men and women are trapped on this ship and suffering, and some of them jumping overboard, because the secretary hasn't had time to take care of business with all the other things he has going on. He created a joint Pentagon Justice Department task force devoted to finding and prosecuting government employees who provide information to journalists. They evicted established news organizations from Pentagon offices and reallocated space to favored MAGA outlets. I know this is a long list, but the point isn't every single thing on it. The point is how long it is. That's why I'm sharing so many examples with you. The sheer number of items shows just how much time they're wasting on frivolous matters. Feel free to bail on the video at any time. I'm just going to keep going. You can watch as much of it as you like, for as long as you like, and you won't hurt my feelings if you leave early. But if you have anybody in your life who you think would benefit from seeing all these frivolous things in one place that our Pentagon has been up to in the last year and a half, send them this way. All right, let's continue. Okay, Hegseth has also been reaching directly into the military promotion process to decide who looks sufficiently acceptable to him. He personally removed 2 black men and 2 women from an Army promotion list for 1-star general. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll had reportedly refused to remove them because these officers had exemplary service records spanning decades. So Hegseth stepped in and removed them himself. The Pentagon insists that their race and their sex had absolutely nothing to do with it. We know that must be true, right? But they haven't explained what these 4 highly qualified officers supposedly did wrong. And they never will, because they didn't do anything wrong. And this was an extremely unusual intervention in a process that is specifically designed to keep military promotions professional, merit-based, and insulated from politics. Then Pistol Pete did it again. The Navy had selected 31 officers for promotion to 1-star admiral. Hegseth personally intervened and removed 9 of them, including every single woman on the list and 2 black men. That left the Navy, and note, not a single white man was removed from the list, but that's got nothing to do with race, right? Yeah. Anyway, that left the Navy with an all-male and overwhelmingly white slate of candidates for promotion. Once again, the Pentagon said race and sex had nothing to do with it, and once again, they refused to explain why any of these officers were removed. Now, this is a man who claims he's eliminating discrimination from the military, but instead of trusting the Navy's merit-based selection board, Warrior Pete personally combed through the names and decided which officers he would allow to advance. That's what he's spending his time on. That's what he's spending his time doing as Secretary of War, personally scrutinizing promotion lists, second guessing senior admirals, and deciding which women and minorities may have been promoted for the wrong reasons. No wonder the men and women aboard the Abraham Lincoln are suffering because nobody has time to take care of the real business of defense. They're all occupied with the serious business of ushering in the MAGA ideology. And Trump himself is more occupied with this stuff than he is with the actual business of running the government. He got personally involved and abruptly fired General C.Q. Brown as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Hegseth then fired Admiral Lisa Franchetti, the chief of naval operations, and General James Slife, the vice chief of staff of the Air Force. None of them were accused of any professional misconduct. There was no finding that they were incompetent. These people were the best of the best, and they were simply removed. And now we wonder why the men and women are sitting on the Abraham Lincoln suffering so badly. Insecure Hegseth probably rightly determined that these people were so competent that they would expose his incompetence and ignorance. And like the president, he's incredibly insecure. And not without cause, I have to say. And that's why he couldn't have these people hanging around. But now that they've gotten rid of them, we're starting to see the rotten fruit of those decisions. We're seeing the fruit of what happens when you get rid of all the competent people. If he said to them, hey, listen, the president's going to start a war in Iran, so let's send the Abraham Lincoln over there with no way to keep it supplied, with sailors that badly need to be rotated, they would have said, no, can't do it, no good, bad idea. But now they're gone. So there's no one to slow him down. And the secretary's idiotic, incompetent plans go full steam ahead. Then Hegseth fired the top uniformed lawyers for the Army, Navy, and Air Force. And listen to this explanation. He said he didn't want military lawyers who might become roadblocks to orders issued by the administration. And they've always said they felt lawyers stopped us from winning wars. And I will just say this, we won a lot of wars when we had lawyers involved in the military. And now that we've gotten rid of them, look what's happening in Iran. Are we winning that war? Don't think so. Anyway, think about what all this means. The job of these lawyers is to advise military leaders about the Constitution and whether or not the orders they receive are lawful. But they don't care about all that. They're like, yeah, we don't need no law. Get out of here with your law. We're here to win wars. No, man, this is the United States. We have a Constitution and we have to follow it. Even the military has to follow it. But Hegseth fired these lawyers. He fired them because he was worried they might get in the way. Because he knows he's going to do something illegal. That's why you fire the lawyers, because you want to get away with it. Apparently, unquestioning obedience is more important than independent legal advice. And now the military has to spend time finding replacements and vetting them and rebuilding their staffs and restoring all the institutional knowledge that Hegseth threw out the door. They also fired Vice Admiral Shoshana Chatfield, the only woman serving in NATO's military committee, or on NATO's military committee. Conservative activists had placed her on a list of supposedly woke officers who they wanted Hegseth to eliminate. No one offered a performance-related explanation for her dismissal. Then they removed the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency after his agency produced an assessment contradicting Trump's claims about the damage inflicted on Iran's nuclear facilities. Once again, the Pentagon offered no public explanation for the firing. That sends a very clear message to everyone remaining. Your job is not to tell the president the truth. Your job is to tell him what he wants to hear. So did someone tell him, hey, yeah, it's okay. Go ahead. Send the Abraham Lincoln over there. Yeah, the guys need to be rotated, but it's okay. They can last a few more months. Is that what's going on? Anyway, whatever's going on, it is a consequence of how these people have run the Pentagon since taking office a year and a half ago. I mean, as if firing individual leaders wasn't creating enough disruption, Hegseth ordered the military to eliminate at least 20% of its four-star positions and 10% of all general and admiral positions. That means the services must reorganize well over 100 senior leadership positions, deciding which commands will be merged, which jobs will disappear, who will assume the additional responsibilities, and how the new command structures will operate. And maybe, just maybe, some positions could be legitimately eliminated. But when this is happening alongside unexplained firings, politically influenced promotions, and ideological purges, it looks less like responsible reform and more like dismantling the military's professional leadership so it can be rebuilt around loyalty to one man. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has had to devote even more time and resources to cleaning up Pete Hegseth's personal mess. Hegseth took sensitive operational information from a secure military communications channel and transmitted it through the Signal app. One of his Signal chats included his wife, his brother, and other people who had no business receiving detailed information about imminent military strikes. That triggered a Pentagon Inspector General investigation, which ultimately found that Hegseth violated Pentagon security protocols. Can you imagine? The Secretary of Defense violated security protocols, and he's still there. He put American personnel and military operations at risk by doing this, and he's still there. So while Hegseth's Pentagon was threatening military officers with polygraph tests and hunting down employees for talking to journalists, the secretary himself was distributing sensitive attack information through an app on his personal phone. And then the Pentagon had to investigate the special technical workaround installed so Hegseth could access and control his personal phone from inside his secure Pentagon office, the precise kind of environment where personal electronic devices are ordinarily forbidden. But, no forbidding for Hegseth. He's going to break all the rules because he doesn't see the need for them. He's like a kid. You know what? He's like all of these people, the president, everybody, from Trump on down. They're like kids who come into something like they start the new school year. They're like, oh no, we don't want to know anything about what happened before. Oh, the teacher's explaining how the class works. No, we don't need to know that. Just give us our assignment. No, you take a new job, and they're like, you have to learn about the company and what our procedures are. And these people are like, no, we'll just start from scratch. We'll figure it out on our own. That's what these people are doing, and that's how you destroy things. That's how you destroy, uh, well-running organizations, like some of the agencies of government used to be. Hegseth has also reportedly demanded such an enormous personal security operation that the Army's Criminal Investigation Division had to pull agents away from investigating military crimes. These agents were sent to guard residences associated with Hegseth and members of his extended family in Washington, in Tennessee, and in Minnesota. The reported cost was in the millions of dollars. So, Army criminal investigators who should have been investigating crimes against service members were being diverted to watch over properties connected to Pete Hegseth's family. Because what's more important? What's more important? We don't need, crime enforcement in the military. Come on. Anyway, inside Hegseth's own office, inexperienced political appointees were reportedly engaged in constant personal feuds. His staff divided into rival camps. People were suddenly fired. Important positions remained vacant. And current and former officials described an atmosphere of continuing paranoia over who was leaking, who was loyal, and where the next embarrassing scandal might come from. That's the leadership team responsible for managing the most powerful military in the world. At least we still imagine that might be the case. They're surrounded by wars, international crises, overextended ships, and exhausted service members, but they're preoccupied with personal grudges, palace intrigue, lie detector tests, and protecting Pete from the consequences of Pete's own behavior. Then there's all the time and money they've spent changing names. Trump ordered the Department of Defense to begin calling itself the Department of War. Legally, it's still the Department of Defense because only Congress can permanently change its name. But that hasn't stopped them from changing websites, email addresses, publications, office signs, and other materials throughout an organization employing millions of people around the world. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that even a modest implementation could cost about $10 million. A broad and rapid rollout could cost as much as $125 million. And if Congress makes the change permanent, the cost could rise to the hundreds of millions of dollars. Hundreds of millions to fight waste, fraud, and abuse. But let's change the name of the Pentagon. Amazing, right? All of that money, all of that money to change the word defense to war, hundreds of millions of dollars to change a single word to appease these insecure people. They even designed and installed enormous bronze Department of War plaques at the Pentagon entrances. Then Hegseth held a ceremony where, like, he didn't have, he had plenty of time to waste. He had nothing better to do. But he held a ceremony where he personally helped install them, just in case America's enemies were waiting to invade until somebody changed the sign on the building. Then they reversed the names of all 9 Army installations that previously carried Confederate-linked names. Congress had prohibited military installations from honoring Confederate officers, so the administration found a cynical workaround. They located different American service members who happened to have the same surnames as the Confederate officers and claimed the bases were now named for them. That allowed Fort Liberty to become Fort Bragg again. That allowed Fort Moore to become Fort Benning again. They found some guy named Benning who wasn't the famous Benning, but just some random Benning. Oh, let's name it after the guy nobody ever heard of. Amazing, right? Oh, it's so cynical, these people. Seriously, they will do anything to violate the law. Anything. They have absolutely no regard or respect for our laws at all. 7 other bases after Fort Bragg, Fort Benning, and those couple of bases, 7 others were renamed to reclaim their former Confederate-linked names without technically violating the law. This meant replacing signs, stationery, websites, vehicle markings, and administrative records for the second time in 2 years. Fort Benning alone estimated that its second name change would cost around $653,000. And while American sailors were fighting a war in the Persian Gulf, Hegseth found time to travel to South Carolina for another ceremony renaming Joint Base Charleston after the late Senator Lindsey Graham, that hero of American life. They also removed Harvey Milk's name from a Navy ship, even though Milk served in the United States Navy. And Pentagon officials reviewed additional ships named for civil rights leaders and prominent women, including Harriet Tubman, Thurgood Marshall, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Cesar Chavez, and Medgar Evers. So I don't like all these people, but look, that's life in a pluralistic society. You have a lot of people here who pay taxes and are citizens who do like those people, and you kind of got to appease everybody a little bit. You can't have everything the way you like it. Anyway, imagine the meetings involved in all of this. Imagine the legal reviews, the historical research, paperwork, replacement materials, ceremonies, and administrative coordination. Imagine how many people have been paid to sit around discussing which names Pete Hegseth finds sufficiently masculine, conservative, and unwoke. But the cultural purge goes much further than names. Hegseth ordered every branch of the military to search its websites, social media archives, and historical databases for material that might violate the administration's rules against diversity, equity, and inclusion. Got to waste a little money on that now, too. More than 26,000 images were flagged for possible removal, and officials said the eventual number could reach 100,000. The search became so mindless. Listen to this. It became so mindless that it flagged material involving the Enola Gay because it had the word gay in it. It also swept up material involving the Tuskegee Airmen, the Navajo Code Talkers, Jackie Robinson, he was black, by the way, women veterans, Black Medal of Honor recipients, and military personnel whose last names happen to be gay. Then employees had to go back and restore some of this material after the removals created a public outrage. So they wasted time erasing American military history and then wasted more time putting portions of that history back. And time is money, so they're wasting money. So all you MAGA conservatives were like, we got to stop all the waste, fraud, and abuse in government. Why aren't you yelling about this stuff? Why aren't you screaming at the top of your lungs like you did with Biden when he did things that were 10 times less serious than these things? All right, Hegseth also has ordered military libraries worldwide to search for and remove books discussing gender, racism, affirmative action, and white privilege. At the Naval Academy, approximately 900 books were initially flagged for review, and nearly 400 were removed from the library. That required librarians, educators, military officials, and lawyers to examine hundreds of books to determine whether young men and women training to defend the Constitution should be allowed to read them. The Pentagon ended official observances of Black History Month, Women's History Month, Hispanic History Month, Pride Month, and other cultural observances. Again, I will just say we live in a pluralistic society, and any government leaders who can't recognize that and know that you have to honor all the different groups in our society, whether you like them or not, because they probably don't like you either, but they're not stopping, from whatever observances you want to have. So, that's the way life is. You got to give and take. And these people are all take. West Point disbanded organizations including the National Society of Black Engineers, the Society of Women Engineers, the Latin Cultural Club, and Leadership Organization for Female Cadets. I don't know what those societies did. I imagine some good came from them, and I imagine no bad came from them. So it's a waste of time to even bother talking about these things, much less taking the time and effort to dismantle them and upsetting thousands of people along the way. What is the point? What is the point? What harm were they doing? No one's named any harm that these groups did. No one. It's just done out of hate, just pure hatred. Anyway, Hegseth has shut down the Pentagon's Women, Peace, and Security Program, calling it a divisive, woke Biden era initiative. There was one small problem with that claim, though. Donald Trump signed the program into law during his first term. Marco Rubio and Kristi Noem had helped create it. But apparently, Hegseth was so eager to destroy anything associated with women that he didn't bother to learn where it came from. He also dissolved the military's 74-year-old Advisory Committee on Women in the Armed Services because the Pentagon accused it of promoting a divisive feminist agenda. Then they constructed an administrative system to identify and discharge thousands of trained transgender service members. Officials were instructed to search medical readiness records, identify affected personnel, and begin processing involuntary separations. These were people who had already been recruited, trained, and placed into military positions. The government had already invested tons of money into them, millions of dollars. But instead of using those trained service members during a major war, which we've now started, the Pentagon began devoting personnel and resources to finding them and throwing them out. Talk about a waste of money, waste, fraud, and abuse. There's more. There you go. And after an appeals court blocked the removal of existing transgender service members while litigation continued, the administration kept spending time and taxpayer money defending the policy in court. And here's a question I've not heard anyone ask. How much money has this administration caused to be spent on court cases because of all the illegal stuff they do, the blatantly illegal stuff they do? It's got to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars by now. I asked AI a while back how many lawsuits have been initiated by the administration and initiated against the administration, and it couldn't even figure it out. It didn't know. It's like that blew its fuse. It's like, wow, too many, can't figure it out. All right, back to the Pentagon. Hegseth then launched repeated reviews of women serving in combat positions to make sure they were meeting what he calls the highest male standard. Physical requirements are a legitimate military concern, but this hasn't been a limited examination of whether individual jobs have appropriate standards. Hegseth has turned it into a continuing ideological campaign involving directives, reviews, speeches, and insinuations that women were allowed into the military into positions that they didn't earn. He also ordered department-wide reviews of beards, hair, grooming, body fat measurements, and physical appearance because nothing makes a military more ready than those things, and getting rid of them or requiring them. I don't know if he knows, but his big pastor, Doug Wilson, has a big beard. So he might want to take that into consideration. Much of his public presentation has centered on fat generals and facial hair and cosmetic symbols of the warrior image he wants the military to project. And that's another problem. It's all about image for these guys, all about image. Got the warrior image. We've got a ship out in the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Sea that can't do its job anymore because the sailors are going crazy on it. All right, so he wants the military to project the warrior image. So he summoned approximately 800 generals. Talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. 800 generals, admirals, and senior enlisted leaders from around the world to Quantico, Virginia, so he could lecture them in person about beards and weight and women and DEI and the warrior ethos. Those were senior commanders responsible for American military operations across the globe. They had to leave their commands, fly to Virginia, arrange transportation and security, and then fly back. Independent estimates place the cost of this meeting in the millions of dollars, obviously. Also, Pete Hegseth could tell hundreds of generals and admirals in person that he didn't like beards and fat people, something he could have done on a Zoom call. And somehow the culture war still wasn't consuming enough of his time, so he began holding monthly Christian worship services inside the Pentagon during the workday, featuring pastors associated with his own conservative denomination. The Pentagon also produced official promotional videos pairing Bible verses with military footage. Look, as a Christian, I find this especially offensive. Christianity should never be turned into a government or into government propaganda or used as a litmus test of whether someone belongs in the American military. And I certainly don't want people like Doug Wilson coming in and teaching and preaching all this anti-biblical, unbiblical Christian nationalist theology, which is a twisted perversion of what God's word actually teaches. It's a twisted perversion of what Christianity is. All right, then the Pentagon overhauled the military chaplaincy system and reduced more than 200 reduced more than 200 faiths and belief codes to 31. Hegseth became personally involved in reshaping the curriculum of approximately 160 schools serving military families. One new course emphasizes Western civilization and Christianity and relies upon a textbook associated with Hillsdale College. I used to thought they were reputable. I guess not. He cut professional military education ties with Harvard, announcing Harvard is woke. The War Department is not, so let's cut ties with the best of the best. Then he prohibited service members from attending programs at Columbia, Yale, Brown, and other universities he called factories of anti American resentment, without publicly presenting evidence that the individual military programs were failing to prepare officers. And then the Department of War threatened to withdraw its support from Scouting America unless the organization eliminated diversity programs, changed policies involving transgender youth, and altered terminology used on its applications. I thought conservatives were all about letting private organizations run themselves, do things the way they wanted. I didn't think they wanted the government to interfere in these things. Anyway, well, I guess that's what they got to do. So while they're involved in all these things, aircraft carriers were being stretched beyond responsible deployment cycles. Pentagon leadership was negotiating the wording on Boy Scout applications. This is the common thread running through all of this. The situation aboard the Abraham Lincoln didn't happen inside a well managed organization whose leadership had maintained a relentless focus on readiness, logistics, and the welfare of its people. It happened inside an organization whose political leaders have been obsessed with loyalty tests, ideological purges, political or personal feuds, book removals, polygraph exams, press intimidation, religious propaganda, grooming regulations, and changing names on buildings. They have spent their time deciding which books sailors may read, which universities officers may attend, which historical photographs Americans may see, which religions the military will recognize, which reporters may enter the Pentagon, and which officers look too black, too female, too independent, or too insufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. And then they act surprised when an aircraft carrier runs low on supplies. This is what happens when leadership is chosen according to loyalty rather than competence. This is what happens when culture war performance replaces the difficult, unglamorous work of governing. And this is what happens when the people responsible for preparing the United States military for war are too busy fighting imaginary enemies inside their own ranks. Okay, that's it. I'm done. I appreciate you watching. I hope you found this helpful on some level, at least. I'm Jonathan Burton, and I will see you soon. Goodbye, and take care.